So in this segment, we're going to be talking about an article from Matthew Syed saying Brexiteers may be digging in, but some hearts are no longer in it. And he specifically talks about Gove and Sunak. He does talk about body language, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but maybe because my body language sucks most of the time. But it's not a bad article, to be honest. It makes a lot of sense in a way. So the first paragraph is a bit whack. He talks about an oath, fulfillment of an oath, and how it kind of destroyed these people, because in the end, they just couldn't do it by the sounds of it. J.R.R. Tolkien's book, Silmarillion, something like that. This one here, if you're familiar with that book, then fair play. Let me know if it's worth reading. The seven sons of Fëanor take a solemn oath to seize the Silmarils, beautiful jewels created by their late father. By the end, the sons no longer believe in the oath, indeed despair of it, seeking to seize the Silmarils not out of conviction, but with weariness, exhaustion, and finally loathing that in the end it's become a burden, and they hate it. They hate the burden that is placed, that this oath, this promise has placed on them. Sounds pretty interesting, I can't lie, even that's a massive spoiler. He says, the author says, I wonder if we see some of the same patterns in Brexit. Or more particularly the version devised and campaigned by those in the Vote Leave faction of the Conservative Party, which again is quite interesting that he's gone for this specific kind of framing. The version devised and campaigned for by those in the Vote Leave faction of the Conservative Party. It's gone for a very specific group of people there. Their hearts don't seem to be in it anymore, which is true. At least feels it, apart from Liz Truss, who was a Remainer. You can see it in their eyes, their shifty body language, their serial evasions when they are answering questions about the continuing hit to the British economy. Like a virus, cognitive dissonance is now endemic in the Tory party. They constantly have to deny the Brexit impact, and they always talk about how COVID's caused more problems and blah blah blah, even though Brexit's got a 4% hit to our GDP in the medium term. Other economies are kind of getting over the COVID slump and have gone back to pre-pandemic levels. I don't think we're one of them. Braverman, Mogg and Duncan Smith and the ultras of the European Research Group are true believers, one-eyed in their commitment, who will remain bolden to that oath until their dying days, the embers of ideological zeal burning to the last. So essentially saying these are diehards. They will die on the hill of Brexit, effectively. Mogg, Braverman, Smith, etc. But then he picks on Michael Gove, who I don't know if he was a Remainer in the past, but Michael Gove not believing in the cause as much. He's being given the role as the level up minister, who's not doing a very good job here. Gove, whose body language betrays a man who has grown in despair of the oath. Last week it was reported that he had deep reservations about ripping up the protocol. He's come back and denied it, saying he'd support the government's position, but obviously he has to. He's a government minister. There's also his bizarre kind of weird impressions he did on the BBC, I think it was. He's also talking about Rishi Sunak, who's said to be unhappy about the insidious way Brexit is weakening our reputation for propriety and international affairs. If Sunak cares about international law, I'd be very surprised about that. But the main thing is, if there is a trade war with the EU, he's going to have to be one of the main ones dealing with it, and dealing with a further cost of living crisis, which I don't think he'll be able to do. Indeed, I suspect that the majority of cabinet ministers perceive the damaging implications of Brexit even as they continue to dig in. They're unable to free themselves from the bind. He quotes two characters there, which I'm not going to butcher their pronunciations, although Maglaw seems not a hard one to pronounce. But essentially saying the cabinet are digging in here, but they don't have the faith, they don't have the belief that they can continue with this, maybe. Because again, this is sucking up a lot of oxygen out of the room. If there is a trade war with the EU, it's all hands on deck at that point. It'll be a lot of work for these cabinet ministers, especially when a lot of them are cognitively limited as is, and with the government trying to cut the amount of civil servants, they will not have as much help or expertise to deal with a potential trade war with the EU. Just as Johnson wailed over the betrayal of Theresa May's deal with an eye to a future Tory leadership, so the Foreign Secretary who voted Remain is stoking the flames despite the damage being wreaked on our relationship with our biggest trading partner. And, I think what he's saying is that Boris Johnson undermined Theresa May, called her deal a betrayal, even though he did vote for it. He had one eye on the Tory leadership, just as, Liz Truss has now. She's trying to appeal to the ERG group, the die-hard Brexiteers, because the simple fact is that's the only way she's going to win, or at least be in the top two for a leadership campaign. After that, it goes to the Tory members, which, let's not talk about them. She grasped the terrible truth that commitment to this cult is demonstrated not by rational policy, but by British by rational policy in the British interest, but by what you're prepared to destroy in this cause. And Brexit has done that. It's soured so many relations with our nearest trading partners, with the Americans, for example, as well. It's just not going well. Author says, I always believed that there was a principal interpretation of Brexit. I don't think there ever was, because they issued so many different things that are impossible, staying in the EU single market and customs union, but also doing trade deals with other countries outside of the EU was never going to work. In this version, Britain could become great again by breaking loose from the EU, making free trade deals and bringing in regulations tailored to our own economy. But we've always done that, though. That's the thing, right? At least for the most part, bring in tailored regulations. We had a huge say over EU regulations and often gold-plated them. We went above and beyond what the EU's minimum standards were. And we always, we talked about that during the referendum. Oh, our standards are already higher than the EU. Yeah, that's true, because the EU set the minimum. They don't really set a maximum. Breaking loose from the EU, making trade deals. I mean, yeah, we've got trade deals, but they suck. Not least in technology and gene editing, which the UK are trying to do. But with technology, we always thrived whilst being a member of the EU. With gene editing, stuff I'm a bit more wary on. He says, I never found the argument remotely persuasive, but I know many decent people who believed it firmly and were willing to encompass the risks it entailed. And how do they feel now? How do you feel? How do you feel about it? That's the question. They believed and still believe that the risks were the greater risks were associated while remaining shackled, as Longsworth, the director of Brexit Policy Centre, memory put it, to the tectonic chains of the EU. But now that we are unshackled, Britannia unchained, we're not doing very well, are we? We're not doing very well at all. The original sin, though, is not merely the hard Brexit of true believers, but the unwillingness to confront the trade-offs, which is true, because if they did confront the trade-offs back in 2019, they would never have got Brexit off the ground. Never. Brexit would never have worked, because we would see, our exports facing customs duties, SPS checks and all of this kind of stuff, and our exports dropping off to the EU and also to Northern Ireland. If they told us that back in 2019, they would never have won a majority. It was this shibboleth that we could not retain. I think it was this thing that we could not retain the benefits, that we could retain the benefits of EU membership while resiling from its obligations. That has hung over this surreal era. This idea that we could get exactly as he puts it, the benefits of the EU whilst, not having the obligations of being an EU member state is just ridiculous. Who would agree to such a thing? It's just comical. It was Cake-ism that finally led to the fantasy that the downsides of Brexit could be magically solved by GATT 24. So if we talk about GATT 24 quickly, it's a provision that basically allows two groups to get into an interim agreement so that they're not in breach of WTO rules. It's temporary, so ordinary under WTO rules, tariffs and other barriers applied to goods coming from other countries must be the same for all WTO members, known as the most favourable nation principle. However, GATT provides several means for members to negotiate agreements themselves to reduce barriers without having to apply those same rules to all WTO members. In principle, Article 24 also allows members to reach interim agreements so that it can offer preferential treatment. I think it'd be stuff like bilateral agreements there. That's what GATT 24 really lets you do. But it allows members to reach interim agreements. And the simple fact is, the EU weren't going in to get an interim agreement with us. I think it would take both sides to allow GATT 24 to work. And Mogg made it out like it was a unilateral thing, or it was always a guaranteed thing, when it simply was not the case. Just madness. So we mentioned that bit, that a hard border in Ireland could be averted by technological solutions. Absolute rubbish. Which country has just technological solutions at their borders for dealing with third countries? None. That frictionless trade would continue after withdrawal from the single market. Never going to happen. I think even Norway is a part of the EU single market, but not the customs union. They still have trade barriers. There are still delays at the Norwegian border, for example. Retaining an open border in Ireland while resisting the logical consequences of a border in the Irish Sea, proclaiming to unionists a brilliant deal or paving the way for United Ireland, which is true. That's what the Irish Sea border does. Northern Ireland is far more reliant on trade now with the Republic of Ireland than it was before Brexit. And, that paves the way for United Ireland because the DUP don't believe in the Northern Ireland Protocol, which gives Northern Ireland the benefits of being in the EU. Northern Ireland can export to GB and to the EU with no problems, but the DUP don't want to accept that because they want to buy Cumberland sausages or some other nonsense like that. And so we come to today, in the midst of a European war with Western solidarity of paramount importance and a cost of living crisis as severe as we've seen for decades, we are contemplating a trade dust-up with the EU, which is true that we are the ones that are going to cause this, not the EU. You can't punch someone in the face and when they hit you back, be like, oh, how dare you do that? It doesn't work like that. A standoff with the White House State Department, who is said to be blindsided by the threat issued by the government because these came out via leaks and press briefings, and a possible spike in prices for poorer British citizens already choosing between heating and eating, which is something that poorer, older people have been doing for since the Tories came in, really, because their massive cuts to benefits and other, social securities and welfare has caused this. Such is the collateral damage of the oath of the Brexiteers that they will destroy everything that stands in their way in order to get Brexit done. And that's what this article is really about here. I doubt we will ever enact the threat to the protocol in the inflammatory way touted by Truss. And, I'm recording this video on the 17th at 1:26, and that legislation that Liz Truss promised still hasn't actually come about yet. Threatening to breach an agreement undermines the trust on which international cooperation depends, which is true that international agreements require both sides or all sides to act in good faith, and the UK is simply not doing that. It is not coincidental that the announcement of another 50 fines of lockdown breaches at number 10 failed to lead the bulletins, and I think that could be another reason why the UK are looking to start a trade war with the EU now, is to avoid Boris Johnson getting fined, or at least for that to be in the headlines. Rule breaking has become so normalised that it's scarcely newsworthy, as Rees-Mogg blitherly proclaimed it's a non-story. It's absolutely not a non-story. I think most of the fines were actually issued to people in and around number 10 Downing Street, which is a madness. Or at least it was one of the biggest single events that caused the most fines. The government has done some good things, not least in its support of Ukraine, which is fine. We could have done that as an EU member state, but it's not psychologically possible for the leadership to rationally manage the trade-offs of Brexit because they are committed to the pretense they don't exist, and you can't deal with them if you pretend they don't exist. That's something that trade experts like David Henning and Dr. Anna Jowazeska have talked about a lot, that you can't deal with problems that you pretend don't exist. This is why they are keeping alive the language of betrayal, that it's the EU's fault. Oh, it's Brussels being sneaky. They've done this. This sense that a painless Brexit is being denied only by the EU's intransigence, which is not true. The moment we decided to leave the EU single market and customs union was the moment that this all went wrong. So our reputation continues to be dragged through the mire, and the union becomes ever more fragile. And Gove and Sunak are surveying the wreckage, shuddering like the sons of Fëanor. And, if it's the case that these two are losing faith in it, I don't know much about Sunak's Brexiteer credentials here, but I know Gove was one of the big ones in 2016, and he was incredibly surprised by the looks of it, of the actual Brexit referendum result. So it's just madness that this is happening right now. Some of the cabinet, most of the cabinet would be digging in, but I don't know how much they've got left in the tank to face down the EU here, and I don't think that legislation will ever be used, the ones that they're promising. It was meant to come out this week. It's still not come out yet. I think Brandon Lewis even said it's not going to come out this week, even though we told the EU that legislation is going to be out this week in draft format. And by the looks of it, I don't think that's even been formed yet. Cabinet haven't signed off on it based on articles I read, at the end of last week, really. So I don't know what more to make of this, apart from let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.